We're just two cool people talking to each other about cool things. I'm gonna, I'm actually a huge nerd. I don't know what I'm talking about being cool. We're two mildly cool, generally awkward people getting to know each other over like a live stream. That's never happened before on YouTube. Definitely never happened before on the radio or on a podcast. Like, this is not normal stuff. Definitely not normal.
I'm just excited that my name is spelled correctly. I said name.
Right.
So, yeah.
I can relate to that. So I am assuming that if we are not live now, we are like in about 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
I think we're live.
Okay. So this is the College 9 and 10 Variety Hour, a weekly hour of variety. It's pretty much a weekly hour of where we kind of do whatever we want. Recently, we've been trying to showcase like really cool staff people, really cool resources on campus. And today, I, Jess Prudent, your local ACPC here at College of 910, who go by she, her, and they, them, am very happy to introduce our College 910 Provost, Mayanthi. Mayanthi, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Mayanthi Fernando. As Jess just said, I'm the College 9 and 10 Provost. I go by she, her, hers. And I'm also a associate professor in the anthropology department. Nice. And I should add that I'm interim provost technically. So your real provost, your permanent provost, Flora Liu, will be coming back next year.
You're a provost now.
I am provost now. There should be a hat.
Right?
You know, you should get it. You should get some sort of like hat or cloak or something that says provost.
I feel like maybe you get a special stool, perhaps. I don't know. Well, today's episode is officially and also unofficially sponsored by The Cove. So, hey, Christian, can you bring up The Cove? See if Christian is here. Thank you, Christian. Christian is our lovely tech person. So this is The Cove Instagram. Pretty much what The Cove does is it acts as a resource and a community for any of our students thinking about being in recovery, or with family members or loved ones currently or in the past who have been in recovery. And to be clear, when we're talking about recovery, it can mean a lot of different things. They provide support one-on-one and support groups, even now during COVID times, for people who are working through alcoholism, working through trauma or experiences from being children of alcoholics, drug addiction, to even food addiction or shopping addiction. In general, it's a community for people who are working towards every day staying in recovery, or at least getting a little bit closer to it. And part of recovery for a lot of people can be finding a safe and open space to tell your story. And that's why we are connecting this all together for this week's episode of The Variety Show, which is Storytelling Hour. For this week, as part of Storytelling Week, we're going to talk about our own stories. We're going to talk about some of the cool storytelling things we do on campus. And we might even go into how to make your own DIY zine so you have something to tell your stories. But let me hand back over to Mayanthi. Mayanthi, can you tell us a little bit more about Storytelling Week and some of the cool things that 910 does around this week?
Sure. And it's not connection okay. I'm realizing my image might be a little choppy, and I apologize for that.
It's a little choppy, but we can still hear you. So let's just go with it.
Okay, we're just going to go with it. So this week is National Storytelling Week. And, you know, at Colleges 910, we do a lot with stories. We have slug stories that all Frosh write at the end of the first quarter of core. When we were in person, we would have a storytelling slam where Frosh actually read those stories out loud. But unfortunately this year, since we're all virtual, we don't have the storytelling slam. So I think it's cool that we're doing something for Storytelling Week, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. So before we get into more of your story, I feel like we should just go through a quick round of what I would say, like, are you sure you're human questions? Those basic things, those little icebreakers that are annoying but fun to do very, very quickly. So are you ready? Okay, first question.
I am. Does it better, do you think, if I turn my video off, and so you just have an image of me, or do you want the slightly choppy video?
You know what? I say, what are you most comfortable with?
Whatever you want.
Okay, how about let's turn off your camera and see how that works.
Okay. Let's see how that works.
Feels weird, let's just go back. By the way,
it's a nice picture.
It's a good picture. If y'all are wondering why our production's a little weird today, first off, there's a global pandemic and we have to set realistic standards for this time. Secondly, Mayanthi, where are you currently?
Yeah, I'm actually in a hotel room in Tucson, Arizona, which is why I have a mildly unstable internet connection. I'm actually on my way back to California from Mexico.
Oh, wow.
I was in New Mexico for like a different project, and now I'm coming home.
Okay, I'm gonna ask.
And obviously, I can't fly because. Yeah, no, feel free, but I'm not flying, so I'm driving. I've been driving back and forth.
Okay. All right, so you ready for speed questions?
Yes.
Coca-Cola or Pepsi?
Pepsi.
Okay, Mexican
with
Coca-Cola with Mexican Coca-Cola or regular Coca-Cola?
Definitely Mexican Coca-Cola, also with lemon.
Cats, dogs, or animals that people definitely underappreciate?
Cats, because people definitely underappreciate cats.
Oh, that's true though. Okay, cold or hot?
Hot.
Okay. Sweet or savory?
Savory.
Live forever or live a truly fulfilling life for only one more year?
Live a truly fulfilling life for only one more year.
Okay. Travel abroad or travel in country?
That one's hard. I would a year ago I would have said travel abroad, but after being stuck here, I'm actually really appreciating traveling around the country.
Anthropology or sociology?
Anthropology.
Okay. And my last question, which is trees or flowers?
I just want to say, sorry, the caption translated anthropology is astrology, I think, and I would totally choose astrology over either anthropology or sociology. So, tree or flowers, trees.
Okay. And then because of your last statement, what is your sign? I'm
a Capricorn.
Okay, what is the stereotype about Capricorn?
Okay, first of all, I just want to say really quickly, sorry, these captions are hilarious. It just captioned I'm a Capricorn as I'm a Catholic. So I just want to.
Okay, to be clear, because for some reason my captions are working. Mayanthi, you are a Capricorn, not a Catholic. Or are you a Catholic?
I'm a Capricorn. I'm not a Catholic. We can. I'm an anthropologist of religion, but I am a Capricorn.
Okay. What is
Yeah, my
what is
captions
this?
are.
It happens. So what is the stereotype about Capricorns that is very true about you, and what is the stereotype about Capricorns that is completely wrong about you?
I think the stereotype is that we're very organized and very kind of structured and just very methodical. And I think that that's true. We're goats, right? And so it's like very steady. We can climb mountains very steadily. That I think is true of me. I think maybe we're also supposed to be stubborn. I don't think I'm too stubborn. I just don't know that much about Capricorns other than the whole kind of very steady thing.
I honestly don't know much either. I'm a Gemini, so I just get a lot of shade with my side. So all I know is that I'm shady. That's all I've been taught. But with that, let's go and do some deeper questions. So for our viewers back at home, what you need to know is I definitely ask the people I'm interviewing, like, what kind of questions do you want me to ask you about? And sometimes I actually ask those questions, and sometimes I don't. Surprise. But the first question that I have for you is honestly, what is a provost? Like, what do you do as a provost? And why should students get to know their provost? Like, when I was a transfer student, I actually never met my provost. I legitimately did not even know that provosts existed until I started working at this university. Why should students and why should transfer students want to talk to you?
That's a great question. A provost, so a provost is basically in charge of or oversees the academic side of the college. So there's sort of, I have a counterpart, it's called a senior director, and that person is responsible more for college student life. And I am really responsible for overseeing like the academic part of the college experience. But I think more generally, what is the provost good for? Why would students want to come see a provost? I think I'll just speak for myself. I'm always really interested to hear and see how students are doing generally with their kind of academic career. And we're a pretty good resource, I think, for students, especially who want advice about majors, who want advice about what to do after graduating, for instance, right? And what kind of careers they would find most fulfilling. And I think it's always good to have a faculty mentor of some kind or multiple mentors, who can sort of give you not just career advice, but life advice. And I think that that's really, the role. Unfortunately, I tend to meet students when the place where I meet the most students, or the place where I meet students the most, is in like academic misconduct hearings, which really sucks. But those academic misconduct hearings are actually kind of interesting because they give me an opportunity to actually talk to students and to hear what they're going through and to hear like what's going on in their lives. And, because generally one plagiarizes or cheats or something like that when one is in crisis, right? Like very few students just do it because they want to, or they're lazy or whatever, right? Most people do it because they're in crisis in some way. And so it's actually been really good for me to hear those stories. To come back to the storytelling thing, because it's been a really, really hard year, and so it's been really. I think for the students who come and talk to me in these academic misconduct hearings, I think they are expecting like a trial, and it's a little bit more like a counseling session. And for like that's how it should be, like. But unfortunately, those are really the only opportunities I have to kind of talk one-on-one with students and, really hear like what they're up to, what's going on, what it's like for them. And and so I don't know, I guess, I would encourage students to attend any kind of session with people like me and other faculty, just in part because it's always good to know it's always just good to know faculty, and to try to remove some of that distance and that hierarchy between people like sort of upper echelons of faculty and students. I think students have this sense that I think a lot of students are intimidated or don't think that we really care. And that may be true of some faculty, but I think most of us really do care. And that's why we got into this. Like, I teach because I actually like teaching. I like to talk to students. I like to hear what they think. I like to, sort of see what they're up to. And fortunately, I would more keen to do that.
Yeah. And I mean, if we can safely get back to person, that may change. So I'm hopeful. But yeah, I think that's something. You talked about mentoring, you talked about connecting. I think that's something that is such a powerful role for the provost to take, and something that I really want to support students in doing as a former transfer student. And also as a student who didn't have any parental support when they were in university. So I was advocating for myself. One of the first things I did when I got onto UCSC from Cabrillo College was I met with all of my advisors, and in the back of my head, I was like, okay, do I like this person? And if I did, I was like, okay, whether they know it or not, they're now a mentor and they have no choice in the matter. Of course, some of them definitely didn't become long-term mentors, but some of them I still have. And I think especially having a mentor who gets this opportunity to see students when they're going through really hard times, or going through situations where they end up in misconduct, first can give you a really realistic perspective of how you're doing. But I think also, and I imagine it's a double-edged sword, but having you in a position of power that you have, working with students who are in misconduct means you get to see how things are hitting people in different ways. And that's okay.
Right.
It happens. It's 2021. 2020 hasn't even ended yet. Don't worry about it.
I just kicked the table.
You're just gonna whack it. So I imagine being able to see that gives you more to advocate for.
Yeah, and I think the point about advocating is really key. I am, my students' advocate with other faculty, with their professors, with the upper administration. And the only way I think we can advocate is if we know what students are going through, if we know what's happening with them. And I think a lot of us, especially the provosts, are really, really committed to making sure that our undergraduate students are doing okay. And we just see a lot. We just see also just a lot more students than I think most faculty do, from different majors, across all of the majors. So we have a more global perspective, a general perspective about what's happening, and that's another reason to if you're in trouble in some way, really reach out to your provost, reach out to your advisors, and again on the academic misconduct thing, I think a lot of us provosts are really advocating for an overhaul of the system, and the only way we know to do that is because we have so much contact with students.
Yeah. Okay, so it sounds like the reason students are getting in contact with their provost is because great mentors, through your position, you can advocate for them. But it also sounds like because you are a person that they know they can talk to, and that you're listening, and you interact with a lot more people than a lot of faculty does, you can kind of funnel their power and their experience and their knowledge and make some big change.
Absolutely, or at least try.
So would you say you're a force of empowerment for students?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, a conduit in some ways for them. I mean, it really an advocate, right? It's a little bit like, it's like, yeah, an advocate.
Yeah.
And also, you know, as we know, Santa Cruz is just an incredibly bureaucratic place, right? And it's really, I mean, it's big and it's bureaucratic, and it's all good to have someone also who knows, you know, who to take a problem to.
Mm-hmm. So, many of our students are first generation or do not have familiar support or do not have social capital to feel like they can advocate for themselves or to even feel like they have the kind of power to be able to advocate for yourself. As a person who's like very, very high in power on this university, at least, you know, in my perspective, how much power do you think students actually
fortunately
have?
I'm not that high. How much what?
How much power do you think students actually have in changing UCSC, in advocating for themselves, in advocating for their peers?
I think that students, when they organize, will have a lot of power. I think that, and I think especially when students organize with some support from folks on the inside, like the provosts, right, or like faculty, or like a, you know, like a department or something like that, then I think it's even more effective. But I do think, I mean, look, I'm going to speak very frankly. I think that the academic misconduct system at this university is absolutely broken, the academic integrity system. And I think, frankly, that many students are getting screwed. And I think there needs to be some serious overhaul. But I also think that part of the reason that the university has not responded to some pretty egregious problems is this question of class privilege that you just brought up. I think a lot of our students don't have the sense of entitlement, frankly, that many upper middle class students who attend private universities have, and the sense of entitlement that their parents have. And there's a way in which things are allowed to move very slowly here because the kind of population that has the class privilege to demand more. And I find that outrageous. You know, I just find that really, really just radically unjust. And I'm not entirely sure what to do about it, but I want to at least flag that. And I think that that's the case in, you know, many instances where our students are just are kind of disadvantaged from the beginning because they don't have the kind of class privilege to be, you know, entitled the way that many upper middle class folks are, you know, entitled.
Indeed. So with that in mind, how do you, as a person who is aware of how our university needs to work, what they need to work on, what they need to grow on, how do you balance working for a university that has what I would call failing bureaucracy, doesn't support certain students, and by certain we mean students who do not have high privilege, economic privilege, social capital, these kind of things. What is it like knowing that and also working for this institute? Also, you can tell me to back off if I'm just making you walk into a lovely little hole that you can't just dig yourself out of.
No, it's a good question. Because I think it's important that people like me, and there are many people like me, like many provosts feel the same way, many faculty feel the same way. I think it's really important that it's precisely the folks who want to change things that, you know, that are in administration, for instance. Like it's unbelievably frustrating to work for an institution that moves so slowly, I will say. but it's also important to do because it's important, that there be people asking for changes. And yeah, I mean, but it is, you caught me at a particularly bad time in the sense that like, I'm really, really frustrated with just the level of bureaucracy, the level of not being responsive to student needs. For instance, like and I keep coming back to the academic misconduct process because I just think it's so broken, but, a student, let's say a student is found not responsible for an accusation of misconduct, the professor is not under any like actual obligation to then change the grade that they have been, that they've given the student, assuming that the student has cheated, for instance. So if you get let's say like professor accuses you of cheating, you get an F in the class, you take your case to the provost and the academic tribunal, they find you not responsible. Technically, you basically have to call upon the professor's generosity to change the grade. And then if the professor doesn't do that, you have to petition to the CCI, the Committee on Courses and Instruction, to have the grade changed. And that process can take like 3 to 6 months, which is insane.
And I imagine, especially if you're like a student, so for some context for our listeners, I was priorly in advising for almost a year. And so I have a lot of different perspectives around these kind of cases. So I imagine like if you are a student who has found yourself in the bad luck of being on like academic probation, let's say, you might have been like me when I was in college and I was working like 3 jobs and doing an internship and doing lab and being a full-time student. Please, if you can, don't be me.
Don't do that. Don't
do other things if you can. Like for a student who has had all the privileges to just focus on their academics, which is a rare few amount of students, to be clear, that might be just an annoyance. But for a student who has not had that privilege, that could be detrimental. That could be something that leads them to dropping out. What are some suggestions that you have for how we could change the system? Like, what would an ideal conduct system look like?
That's really complicated, and that's probably not something I want to get into right now. Okay. Just because I'm still working through my own head, what exactly could be different. But I do want to also just very quickly say, I think, especially for our students, I think it's important to understand that the hearing that you have with your provost is not a trial. Like the provost is not your adversary. And I really do try to understand like what is happening, and if you did in fact, and there are students who do cheat, who like go on sites like Chegg or whatever and get help that they're not supposed to do and all of that. But it's very rare that a student does that when they're not in some kind of like they're overwhelmed in some way. They've signed on to many courses. They're taking like 3 CSE courses, or they're working and taking courses, or their family life is falling apart, or they're having like a mental health crisis or something like that. So again, I just want to highlight that these are really opportunities. If anyone walks away with one thing from this conversation, it's that that meeting with the provost is not like horrible and scary and awful. Even if you did in fact cheat and commit academic misconduct, the point is to make sure that you have the resources that you don't do something like that again. It's not just to punish you.
To be clear, you are not a scary, terrifying judge with like a guillotine ready to execute us.
I am not.
That's great. with that in mind, let's do some more like you as a human being, not scary, just like a chill person who happens to be in the provost role trying to help you out in a difficult situation questions. You ready?
Okay.
Cool. So one of the things that you told me to ask you about were like some of your 3 top loves, passion, interest. One being travel, one being cats, and the last one being TV shows. So if you were to have a TV show about cats and travel, what would it be called, and what would be your first episode?
Oh my God.
By the way, I asked her this question ahead of time to check in, so she should be prepared by now. Come on, girl.
I have absolutely no idea. I mean, I don't know, like Feline Follies or something like that. Catopia. Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea what the title would be, but I think it would be like a traveling cat, like a cat who just had or maybe a cat who who was cool with just like putting a paws up on the window of a car and just like riding around, doing like a little road trip, and then getting put on a leash and walking around a new city.
Oh dang. Seeing maybe this cat would be called, I don't know what this cat would be called. I got nothing. I'm thinking Reginald, because for some reason in my head animals need the like most refined like waspy names that I can think of, like the most human names.
Well, I follow a cat.
Mm-hmm.
I follow an Instagram named Rover. I think his name is Rover. Rover the Adventure Cat or something like that. And he goes on little adventures with his cat parents.
Okay, what would be the first place you would take this cat on their travel trip? Like number 1 cat destination.
Gosh. I mean, Iceland popped into my head. I don't really know why.
Yeah, why?
I don't know, because then they could just like there's nobody there. It's just a lot of sheep, and horses, and it's a lot of there's very little. Yeah, I feel like you could just put them on a long leash and let them go.
I would think of like the Sahara, like desert, because then they have a little sand.
Mm-hmm.
Just dig it up. That's like just a giant sandbox. They have free range. Bugs randomly pop up out of the sand. They'd be like, "What the heck is that?" Smack. Fun. They like
a giant litter box, basically.
Yes, a giant cat toilet. Occasionally, like I don't know, if you're in Joshua Tree, you have some lovely trees and you'll scratch. It sounds nice. Okay.
True.
Another question to be asking. So,
okay,
your major, the area of research that you focus on is anthropology and religion, right?
Yeah.
What do you, like if you were to describe the research you do in one sentence to someone who has no idea what you're doing, how would you describe it?
Well, I'm going to use 2 sentences. My first book was on Islam and citizenship in contemporary France, and the way that second and third generation Muslim French are not fully accepted as full French citizens, and trying to understand why that was. My second book is a little weirder, and it's really about the way that we in the secular West don't really have the conceptual framework or like even language to talk about certain anomalous experiences. So like out of body experiences or ghosts or, spirits and like spirit world. And so I'm trying, but that doesn't mean that many of us don't have those experiences. So a lot of like good, kind of secular modern people will nonetheless have these really strange experiences that they don't know how to make sense of. And so that's what my second book is about.
I'm so curious. Do you, in your second book, I'm making an assumption here, but I would feel like people would fill in that gap of spirituality based in like a religious context with like science. I feel like when people are faced with uncertainty, they tend to turn to religion, science, or each other. So I'm curious.
I think that's really true. What's interesting to me has actually been more, so there has been a lot of turning to science. And I'm definitely interested in that, but I'm also interested in folks who don't actually do either and then kind of let that experience linger. So for instance, I'll give you like an example. I have a colleague who has this story about essentially seeing a ghost of a dead woman come to her bed like 2 days after the woman had died. And she doesn't actually do anything with it. She doesn't try to understand it scientifically, but she also doesn't try to understand it religiously. But this happened like 30 years ago, and she hasn't forgotten, and she still tells the story. And it's those kinds of experiences actually that I'm more and more interested in, like the stuff that just lingers, and people don't try to make sense of it because, they don't sort of like explain it away through science, but they don't also then turn to religion and be like, oh, I believe in, angels or whatever, right? Or heaven or what, that kind of stuff.
They just sit with the uncertainty. I feel like that's very rare for most people. I mean,
yeah, that's true about certain things, but like this kind of stuff, people see, like ghosts. You start talking about ghosts, and random people will be like, "Oh yeah, I had an experience once," but it doesn't turn them into ghost hunters. It doesn't turn them into, that's the kind of stuff I mean.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. If we ever get you back on another episode, you gotta tell us more. Okay. I got so many. I want to talk so much about ghosts now, but I gotta keep coming back to the topic. Gosh. Okay. So in 100 years, what will religious anthropologists say about the United States? Current United States.
Yeah.
And if you want to back away from this, I feel like this was a trap. It's just the first question that came to mind. Do you need to do?
No, I don't really know what's going on in the U.S. right now. It's such a strange place in a lot of ways. Like I feel like it's very hopeful on the one hand, and also just very strange on the other. And I do think that there's a certain kind of like apocalyptic thinking. And the QAnon stuff is like just really strange, and I can't wrap my head around that. But I do think that there's something, I don't know. There's something like very strange going on, and I'm not. Yeah, maybe we back away from this only because I don't have that much to say, I think.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I don't work on the U.S. I don't work on the U.S. So I don't. I don't really have much to say, like expert wise. I just have thoughts.
Okay, well, let's talk about outside of the US and let's do some comparisons. Let's talk about your traveling. So, how many other countries have you been to?
Oh, wow. I mean, more than 20.
Dang, I've never left the country.
Really?
I desperately want to. I really do.
Wow.
But again, I have no, for a little background for you. When I turned 18, I went to college. A few years after that, I cut off contact with my biological family for a variety of reasons. Ended up with like a really tight chosen family, but they're definitely not billionaires. And so I've never had the kind of financial support or means or even stability to necessarily think of traveling outside of the state more than a couple times every 10 years, honestly. I would love to. It's a dream of mine. But I'm always curious about where people go and what they learn about it. One of the questions, why I bring this up is mainly because like, I feel like when you have never left the United States, you have this idea of what other countries are like, but it's not realistic. So what do you think is the most false assumption, the most peak falseness assumption that Americans make about other countries. And that was my dog, who accidentally stepped on his own tail.
And I've spent a lot of time in France. And I think, one big assumption that Americans make is that French people are really unfriendly. And I think that Parisians tend to be, I think that's partly because Americans often make very little effort to learn other people's languages, even like a basic please and thank you. So American tourists have a terrible reputation, and it's often like pretty well deserved. And part of it is really just, you just can't like walk up to someone and assume that they speak English. But I will say that if you don't do something, if you're not rude to other Parisians are actually quite helpful, and they're very, they're not an unfriendly people. And the French are definitely not, again, not unfriendly, especially like villages and stuff. Yeah. I wasn't born in the US. So even just coming to the US meant that I traveled. But it is one of those things, like Jess, you're right. Like I think there's a certain sort of class privilege to enable travel. And I really do wish that universities could do more to send students abroad, and send students from different class backgrounds abroad, because I do think that it is really important. Frankly, I also just think this is one of the things that's always struck me as really strange about the U.S. is that the U.S. is essentially an imperial power.
Yes, it is.
We fight wars all over. We got our military all over. There are warships all over. But we have a population that doesn't travel.
We do not. And I find it interesting. A lot of people's only way to access travel and only way to access sometimes really basic things like healthcare is to go into the military. And that's not to shame anybody who makes that choice, whether it be because of pride, and this needs to take care of a country or follow a family lineage, or just because you want to, or because you do want to travel and you do want to have an opportunity to have economic stability. I bring that up specifically because I have some family who is from the Appalachians, which it's very, very common because that area has been hit by a lot of really terrible capitalists destroying their economy and their natural resources over and over again. Y'all should check it out. There's a series of Wikipedia pages that are just painfully on the nail. The only way that they can get out of these impoverished situations is to join the military. So it's pretty much you have two choices. You die slowly, or you maybe die in the military, but you maybe don't. And so I find that so interesting that we'll fund this imperialistic study abroad program. Lots of air quotes, just a bunch of air quotes around that. But we don't have across the country the kind of supports that would allow people to actually diversely travel. I know in California, we have legislation that specifically supports former foster youth in doing study abroad. But that's only in California. But yeah, I find that fascinating if we had that.
So I actually cut out for part of that and then I suddenly came back. I'm going to try turning my video on because I think my internet might actually be more stable than it was before.
I can see you.
Yeah. No, it's still kind of unstable.
That's okay.
That's all right. I do wish that travel were just more accessible to more people. And it really changes the way that, for me at least, I'll speak for myself, it changed the way that I approach certainly questions of even diversity and like what that might mean. One of the things about traveling abroad is that it's only then that you really begin to understand American power and how it works. It's powerful. I don't know. It's really only by being abroad that I fully understood, again, just like how I don't know what the word is. Like American imperialism, how it works, basically. So
no, I feel it, because I've never studied abroad, but I love TikTok. I feel weird and crusty saying that as a millennial, knowing that our Zoomers are like, why are you on my app? But one of the things that's opened me up to is like TikTokers from around the world talking about how things in America are very weird to them. So there's one TikToker that I follow who is a transplant from the United States to Italy, transplanted like a month before COVID hit them, and talked about how when there was a loud bang at a conference that she was at, she ducked and was terrified. And everybody was like, why are you doing that? And then her friend was like, she's from America. And they all understood why, because of how many mass shootings that we have that is completely not normal, not okay, is not something that other people experience at all. And it's one of those things where, like, yes, there's that negative side of like, oh, you see how much your country really needs to work, like, quickly now, and how we easily could. But then you also get to see some of the things that people appreciate about your country. So I've noticed that people really value the amount of space that we have, and how, at least historically, we do preserve a lot of the land that we stole from Native Americans.
Yeah, I was going to say,
No, please say it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like we went down a
we also, well, part of the, what you often realize when you travel abroad, especially in Western Europe, is and parts of South Asia, just how atrocious the public transportation system is in this country.
Oh, yes, it is.
Right. Again, many other nations just have a better public transportation system, one that services also, basically public transportation here is if you're poor, right? And so it sucks because most poor people don't have political power.
Which is not to say that they could not. It's to say that the system specifically plans out the areas where you have political power to be convenient to people who already have it.
Right. Well, and the thing is, if there's a most people, or not most people, you can see it in the way also that COVID has affected certain populations and not others, right? So if you have to take public transportation in a pandemic, that puts you at risk in a significant way, right? Let alone if you have to continue to go to work taking public transportation in a pandemic. And so, there's a way, again, Europe has a lot of problems, but their public transportation system is pretty great. Both within cities and then also from city to city. And in this country, there's basically really no way to get around the country by train. You can get around by flying. That's expensive, and a lot of people drive. And both of those, both driving and flying, are also extremely carbon. Your carbon footprint is much bigger than if you were able to take a train, for instance, right? And so there's all kinds of ways in which we are like really, really behind, I think, many other nations.
Mm-hmm. So with that
I'm going to turn my video off again because I think.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
With that in mind, what do you think are a few things that students could do to make some changes in this country? Or like, I feel like sometimes when we talk about ways that the United States needs to fucking change right now, I'm adding the fucking. This is not to place the fucking on Mayanthi. We tend to get into this cycle of like, it's shit, it's shit, it's shit. But I also like to think in the context of, well, Georgia turned blue because people like went out and organized and connected and provided support and resources. And yes, there's probably politicians that are working right now to make sure that never happens again. It's not going to work for them, but they can try. What are some ways that we as people can organize and come together to deconstruct, abolish, reform systems of oppression that create
local organizing?
Yes,
local organizing. I mean, Georgia is it's an incredible case, right? Because the demographics are kind of 50-50. And so there was a lot of local organizing and also patience, right? This did not happen overnight. I think for those of us who don't know anything about Georgia and woke up and were suddenly like, wow, Georgia turned blue. But it took a lot, took a lot of struggle. It took a lot of effort. It took a lot of local organizing. It took a lot of coordination. And it took a lot of patience and actually, failure, right? I mean, Stacey Abrams obviously has done a lot of this work. But the reason that she was even able to run for governor in the first place was because there had been local organizing that made her, someone who that put her up there. I mean, and then she lost. I mean, she lost because of mass disenfranchisement. But anyway, but what I really, really admire about that is she lost, she technically lost. She continued to work for voter rights, and she continued to work with the people that she had been working with before, and she and others continued this local organization effort, right? And I think that's a real model for those of us who want to organize for change. But I think that kind of organizing takes a lot of it takes a lot of like organizational savvy, and it takes a lot of patience. And you're going to have losses as you're going to have losses along the way. You're going to have setbacks, and that's okay. That's part of the struggle. And I think there's a way sometimes in which like we're now increasingly a culture of instant gratification, right? And like very short attention spans. And that's not how political change happens, at least much political change. It takes a lot of just like on the ground effort, long term, years.
I feel like this is what you just said is kind of like the through line of this entire conversation in a lot of ways. Because I feel like what you said is the number one way to make change is to come together, is to connect and get support and provide support long-term patiently and build relationships toward a common goal. And I feel like with the Cove, you're building relationships, you're being vulnerable with each other to provide that common goal of supporting each other out of toward recovery. In the work that you do with students who are in conduct issues, you're not just saying like, hey, you done fucked up. You're saying like, hey, we're having a relationship and a conversation. I'm not your judge and executioner. I'm the person who's here to figure out how we can help you and support you so that you don't feel like you need to make these choices again. To our talks about the religious work that you're doing, how people tend to go to religion or or science, but there are people who find the middle ground or find a completely other point. And I was just like, and maybe other people can be part of that. And now we're here. We're here at this point where, yes, there's a shit ton this country need to work on, but we are this country. And it's slow work and it's painful work and you fail a lot. But if at the end of the day, things get a little better, that's a win.
Right. And I think you need both the rabble rousers and the organizers, right?
Oh, yes.
You kind of need pressure from both sides. And this goes back to something I think you had asked earlier about students organizing on this, campus for change. And I think I had said, it's important that you work, like that you make these kinds of connections, that you link up with other folks who can be allies. And you do that in an organized way, and you kind of, you strategize, right? There's long-term strategy, and then there's short-term tactics, and you have to really have a pretty good understanding of both. And you have to put your ego aside. I mean, that's the amazing thing about Stacey Abrams is she, it's not an ego-driven project, right? And what she essentially did was she got 2 other people elected. I mean, it's just a pretty incredible just organizing effort, but also on a personal level, the ability to just kind of put ego aside like that, and and work for the people, right? Even if it meant that she is not the person she's not governor, she's not, she's run for Senate either, right? She did the organizing on the ground. And I just think that kind of lack of egos is pretty incredible and a big part of any kind of organizing.
I agree. I completely agree. So before we wrap up this episode, I wanted to do a little outreach for some of the events that we have coming up in the coming week. So y'all, if you're not on our Instagram, you should get on our Instagram. Because we have updates on jobs that are opening up. If you're looking for a job, we are so hiring for next year. You need to apply. We are also advertising for like really cool clubs and meetups. Like Praxis is currently doing a series of COVID talks. So if you need to vent or get up-to-date information or just talk to other people, you need to go on our Instagram and take a look. This Sunday for Storytelling Week, we're also doing a live stream identizine between our activities department and the COCO. So if you like art and learning and talking with other students, you need to come to this thing. Check it out on our Instagram. We're doing outreach for it right now. And finally, thank you, Christian. Christian is our amazing tech person who makes all the magic really happen. And finally, next week, we are going to be doing an amazing full week of virtual programming, starting on Monday, moving on to Tuesday, and then kicking it off with Thursday, all about Parasite. If you haven't seen the movie yet, now's the time to watch it so that you can make some cool dishes with us, talk to some amazing panelists about what this movie means in the grand scheme of things and just cinematically, like beautifully visual stuff. And come back next week. We're going to have another guest and we're going to be talking about more things. Check out the 9/10 calendar for details. And as we're heading out, I just want to remind you all that I am Jess, but your local ACPC. I go by she, her, and they, them. And we have had our lovely guest, Mayanthi. And I am so
It was great to be here.
Yeah.
Sorry that I wasn't, on video.
It happens, man. It's 2021. Like if we were able to have peak production at this point, like we would all be paid better as well. It's just not that year. So this has been the College 9/10 Variety Hour. Thank you all so much for watching this either live or later on. And thank you, Mayanthi, for being one of our first guests.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I guess we still have 2 minutes, but let's just slowly fade out to the soft, dulcet, high-pitched tones of my voice. La, 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 la.